Well, hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Airmic Academy workshop session, Getting Workplace Investigations Right. My name is Alexander Frost. I'm the head of partners and markets at Airmic. It's my pleasure to provide the introduction for this morning's session, which is delivered by our good friends and partners at HF. Now, as always with Airmic sessions, we have a number of learning objectives, and I will come to those in just a minute. But first, a quick overview of the platform that we are using. This webinar is provided on the Airmic Livestorm platform. Everyone should be familiar with it by now, but if not, the most important thing to note is at the bottom right, you will see a questions tab and a chat tab. Chat allows you to speak to other people attending the webinar. The questions tab is there to enable you to ask questions. So please make sure to put your questions in the questions tab and not in the chat tab, so that the presenters can see them throughout the session. Another point to remind you of is towards the end, my colleague Amelia is going to be launching a survey to provide some feedback for us, feedback both on the operational nature of the webinar and on the content. Please take the time to answer that. Both ourselves at Airmic and our partners find that feedback incredibly useful. So just a quick word then about today's session. Workplace investigations, they shouldn't be a box-ticking exercise. This webinar is designed to offer a practical and structured overview of what good looks like when concerns arise, whether that issue is conduct, whether it's performance or capability, a grievance, discrimination, or whistleblowing. And the presenters are going to work through the core building blocks, such as deciding when a formal investigation is needed, setting clear scope in terms of reference, appointing appropriate investigators, and keeping roles distinct, and so on. As I mentioned previously, the learning objectives for this session, now on the screen, are by the end of this session, you'll be able to set out clear terms of reference for an investigation, to identify appropriate sources of evidence, and to explain how to ensure documentation is accurate, secure, and confidential. You'll be able to use effective investigation interviewing techniques, including asking open and probing questions, avoiding leading questions, and creating clear, reliable meeting notes. Be able to assess different or conflicting accounts fairly and produce a clear investigation report that stays within the agreed terms of reference, and recognize the key principles of a fair workplace investigation. And we are very grateful to have with us today two excellent presenters, James Taylor, Head of Investigations by Design, and Pippa Whitty, an investigator at Investigations by Design. James and Pippa, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you at Airmic. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. Obviously, I think investigations is one of the more interesting topics that we have. So obviously, my name is James Taylor, Head of Investigations by Design. I'm an employment solicitor by background and have almost a decade's experience conducting workplace investigations for IBD. We're an associated company of Horridge Farrelly, so we're independent investigators that are often asked to come in and investigate complex, high-profile investigations across public and private sectors. We work with clients such as NHS trusts, fire services, universities, construction businesses. We've even worked for an opera house. So, we've also in terms of across the UK. So we've been everywhere from the north right down to the south coast, primarily whistleblowing investigations, grievances, conduct, and MHPS, as we say, the doctors' investigations. So over the next 40 or so minutes, we'll share some practical insights from our experience when workplace investigations are needed, how to approach them, and some common pitfalls to avoid. And I think we're finishing with a 15-minute Q&A session. I'll pass over to Pippa to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name's Pippa, and I'm an experienced workplace investigator. I've got over 30 years global HR and employee relations leadership experience, and I work across public and private sector. I conduct workplace investigations for IBD. I specialise in conduct, discrimination, whistleblowing, and safeguarding, and lastly, grievances. And it's a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you. And I think so. The good place to start is always why are investigations important? Why listen to us? We have some experience in the area. So obviously, starting with why investigations are important. I think a well-conducted investigation is often the foundation for fair and defensible workplace decision making. It allows organisations to understand what has happened, what evidence exists, what remains in dispute, and what conclusions can be properly reached. Importantly, investigations are not about proving a case from the outset. It's about establishing the facts through a fair, balanced and structured process. I suppose this matters because employment decisions, particularly disciplinary decisions or grievance decisions, whistleblowing responses or decisions involving allegations of discrimination or harassment can have consequences for all the parties involved. The consequences may affect employment, reputation, relationships at work, well-being and organisational trust. I think a robust investigation will ensure that individuals are treated fairly, that they understand the case or the concern being examined, and that any findings are based on evidence rather than assumption, speculation or rumour. So I think obviously this is AIRMIC, so from an organisational perspective, investigations also help manage risk. Now, that includes legal and procedural risk, but also operational, cultural and reputational risk. When concerns are not investigated properly, problems can escalate. Staff can lose confidence in organisations, managers may feel unsupported, decision makers may be left trying to make important decisions without a reliable factual basis. By contrast, a timely, proportionate investigation gives the organisations a clearer picture and supports more consistent, transparent and accountable outcomes. Now, investigations are also important because they demonstrate organisational values and practice. Many organisations describe themselves as respectful, inclusive and well run. The way complaints and concerns are handled is one of the clearest tests as to whether those values are being lived. Now, a fair investigation process shows employees that concerns are being taken seriously, that people are being listened to, and that decisions will not be reached prematurely. So I think we've got obviously some of the examples of when an investigation would be required. And I think, as you can see, there are a number of reasons there. Each would have its own separate policy, procedure, etc. So whilst the framework may differ, the core investigation principles are the same. It's that natural justice, fair procedure, putting the allegations properly, allowing a full response, ensuring impartiality and providing an appeal route. And a reasonable investigation underpins a fair process. And essentially planning is key from the outset. I think we'll get onto that in the next slide, but I think the first place to start with an investigation is always the basic principles. So so looking at the basic principles here, the starting point is what is the investigator's role. It's to draft a report detailing the evidence both for and against. The investigator is not there to prove a complaint, to defend an organisation, or to build a case against an employee. The investigator's role is to gather the relevant evidence, test the evidence fairly, and provide a balanced factual basis for the decision maker. This is where often investigations fall down, the confusion between the investigator and the decision maker, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. The other thing is delay. So address matters with no undue delay. Now, delay can seriously undermine an investigation process. Matters should be addressed with no undue delay, and it can also impact the quality of the evidence because memories fade, documents may become harder to locate or even be deleted, as we've seen. Workplace relationships can deteriorate while matters remain unresolved. This does not mean rushing the process, but it does mean keeping momentum and avoiding unnecessary drift. A good investigation also needs a clear scope, so everyone involved should understand what issue is being investigated. Clear terms of reference, which we'll discuss in a later slide, will help keep the process focused, proportionate, and reduce the risk that an investigation expanding beyond what is necessary. A big principle also is confidentiality. So information should only be shared where it is proper to do so. This protects the individual involved, preserves integrity of the evidence, and maintains confidence in the process. Pippa will touch on the next slide in terms of who should investigate, but it's important the investigator must be even-handed and avoid bias. And that means considering evidence that both supports the allegation and evidence that may undermine it. So a fair process requires open-mindedness throughout. I think what we would often see an organisation may have undertaken a harassment investigation where they perhaps focus on what was intended by the alleged perpetrator rather than the impact. There, you know, in terms of the even-handedness and elements like this, it runs throughout it. So we'll touch a little bit on that later. But the other final part is following the applicable policy. So obviously a fair process is essential, particularly where the outcome may have serious consequences. I mean, you can conduct the best investigation in the world, but if you're completely out with policy, they can often question the value and use of the investigation. So obviously talking about practical trigger questions here, you know, what's the risk of not investigating, and what information is needed now to make a fair and informed decision? So those sort of questions will help determine whether an investigation is required and how detailed the investigation needs to be. I think a good place to start also is who should investigate.
So moving forward then, who should investigate? Well, planning is key to any investigation, and to start that process is to consider who should undertake that investigation. So when choosing your own investigator, start by checking your policy, but then take a step back, assess the circumstances of that case. Ideally, your investigator should be trained or experienced, not only in investigations themselves, but also in areas like equal opportunities or specialist topics where necessary, such as finance or safeguarding. Ideally, your investigator should be trained not only in investigations themselves, but also in the topics where necessary. Independence is crucial. You want someone who can exercise objective judgment in genuinely open-minded. Gravitas also matters, and the person must be confident to manage challenging conversations and stand by their reasoning, so not to be easily influenced. Ultimately, the investigator sets the tone of fairness, so choosing the right person at the outset significantly influences both the integrity and the defensibility of the final outcome. On multi-contractor sites, the investigator may need to navigate relationships between principal contractors, subcontractor or agency workers, so independence becomes even more essential in those circumstances. A supervisor familiar with the individuals involved may seem convenient, but actually that familiarity often creates an unconscious bias. So an investigator usually becomes more effective the more investigation they do, because experience does make a real difference. So think about maintaining a pool of trained investigators within the workplace. So where to start? Well, in practice, the quality of investigations is also shaped by the planning that takes place at the outset. The first step is to establish clear terms of reference. Those should be prepared by reference to the relevant workplace policies and procedures, so the investigation has a proper framework. The terms of reference should identify what is being investigated, the scope of the investigation, who is involved, and what the investigator is being asked to do. Clarity at this stage is the most important because it reduces delay and minimises the risk of challenge later. If the issues are unclear, the investigation can quickly drift, so expand unnecessary or fail to address all of the relevant concerns. So focus helps ensure the process remains fair, proportionate and manageable. So where an employee is being investigated, the terms of reference should usually be notified in advance of any investigation meeting. This is so the employee understands any issues in the grievance process in the terms of reference should ideally be agreed with the employee who's raised the concern. This is to make sure the investigation is addressing any of their complaints that have been made. A key part of the investigator's role is also to preserve the integrity of the process. So where appropriate, the evidence. That means that we need to prepare a schedule of allegations or issue identifying and requesting relevant document as early as possible. identifying witnesses promptly so meetings can be arranged without any unnecessarily delay, as James mentioned earlier. It also means putting in place appropriate safeguards around confidentiality. Information should only be shared where there's a proper need to do so, and this is where most investigations can fall down. That protects both those involved, avoids contamination of evidence, and supports confidence in the fairness of our process. So the key message is good planning and preparation gives the investigation a structure. They help the investigator stay focused, avoid delay, preserve evidence, and produce a process that is more likely to withstand any scrutiny.
Okay, so I think arguably this is one of, or if not the most important step, I think, in an investigation is defining the scope of the investigation and the terms of reference. So what should a good terms of reference document include? I think first, the specific allegations or issues that need to be investigated. It should set out the methodology, any specific instructions to the investigator, the indicative timescales, any matters which are expressly outside the scope of the investigation. It may also identify points that are not in dispute to assist all parties. Importantly, it should create enough structure to guide the investigation while still leaving room for follow-up evidence if it emerges. So in some cases, the commissioning manager may ask the investigator not only to establish facts, but also to indicate whether there's a prima facie case to answer or whether facts could potentially amount to a breach of policy, or if so, that remit needs to be made clear at the start. Now, we say the terms of reference is a living, breathing document and should be kept updated. We do often find in the course of an investigation, you would have a set of facts at the start, and then once you start meeting with parties, additional elements that come out. I mean, it's then on the investigator to update the commissioning manager to say, well, these additional issues have arisen, and whether to include them in the investigation. And if they're of conduct of, say, a similar nature or type, it may be the terms of reference need to be amended so as to say, yes, we need to include that in this investigation, or a decision being made that it needs to be dealt with elsewhere. I think either way, I think it's important that the document is not just viewed as something that can't be changed. I think it might be appropriate to be changed on many occasions. Now, often we would focus and structure terms of reference in terms of the background. So the terms of reference may start with, the investigations could be commissioned by, identify a commissioning manager, and then summarize the headline issues. And if a schedule of concerns or complaints to follow, it would outline that. It also outline the investigator who's been charged with the investigation, the responsibilities of the investigator. So to define the scope of the investigator's work. And often in the sense of commissioning managers are often responsible for determining whether there should be any formal action, say, as a result of the grievance. The investigator's role is to gather the evidence and report to the commissioning manager. So separating that out and clarity, also outlining what standard the investigator is required to report on in terms of evidence contested, not contested, where disputed, a rationale adopted by the investigator for finding in one way or the other, or if it's not possible to reach a conclusion, why. The report should also contain an explanation for behaviour and mitigation. So it would outline the role of the investigator in doing that. Also the methodology. So often it would start with a desktop review. You'd ask the investigator to collate the evidence, to identify relevant witnesses. You'd also ask the investigator to, excuse me, whether to designate perhaps a contact person for contacting, arranging meetings. You'd also, whether the meetings are going to be recorded, what's going to happen to the recordings, whether witnesses were going to be sent a copy shortly after the meeting to sign, to agree the notes, the time frame, how the investigation is going to be presented to the commissioning manager. So all of these elements would be appropriate and indeed helpful to consider including in the terms of reference. And each investigation is different, and each turns on its own facts. So the terms of reference, I think, in summary, an important document. Spend time, get it right. It sets out the methodology for the entire investigation.
So evidence gathering. So now we've looked at the defining scope and setting a clear terms of reference. Let's turn to what actually means in practice when we're gathering our evidence. So a key point to remember is the evidence gathering isn't about building a case. The complainant or the respondent has got to be neutral, and it's a fact-finding exercise. That means we're actively looking for material that both supports and challenges each version. When we talk about evidence, think broadly. It could be a document, site logs, rota records, permit information, digital messages, emails, photos, anything really that establishes timings, wordings, behavioural conduct. In many cases, interview notes, audit trails, or even CCTV footage can play an important role, providing a proportionate and lawful use. One of the biggest practical tips we give is to request contemporaneous material early. Messages get deleted, they even get tampered with. The systems automatically overwrite older data, and memories can shift surprisingly quickly. So securing those early records can really make a significant difference when the quality of your findings. As you'll see on the slide, the question to keep coming back to is what evidence will help you collaborate and clarify the timing, the location, the wording, or the impact of what is said to have happened. That becomes your evidence and your roadmap. Finally, it's worth noting that in some cases, particularly those involving the message apps, it's not unusual for WhatsApp chats or group messages to get tidied up once an allegation is raised. That loss of material can seriously undermine an investigation. So this point will come specifically important when we look at conflicting accounts shortly. So with that in mind, I'll hand back over James, let him walk through protecting evidence and integrity.
Okay. So the next slide essentially focuses on evidence integrity, particularly where digital evidence is involved. Now, key part, as Pippa said, is to preserve the integrity of the investigation and the process, where appropriate, the evidence itself. Now, the way evidence is gathered, recorded, tested matters, and it's especially true with these text message, emails, screenshots, and materials. Now, what I've produced here is on one of the messages. Well, there's two examples here, and they look very similar at first glance. Both carry very different meanings. The first example, the message could be read as potentially inappropriate or ambiguous. The second message is a follow-up message, changes the context entirely. It's about a surprise thank you card. I think now, which of these do you, and we'll launch a live poll now, which of these do you think has been created by AI? So you've been presented these in the course of an investigation, and which of these do you think is AI generated? And just as an interest, I'd be interested in everyone's view, partly because we are seeing an increasing amount of either submissions or indeed evidence that has the potential to have been amended by AI, and AI is getting very, very clever, and I think we all need to keep up with it in this sense, I suppose. So I don't know if everyone's had a chance to vote. I won't give it away too soon. I think we've got a few coming in. So I think the first point really of the exercise is it's not always possible to identify AI generated or altered material by looking at them. Often we cannot. I mean, the real point is the investigators should avoid taking, I think, digital material or really evidence at face value without considering the source, the context, or completeness. I think everyone's had a go. So I mean, both actually have been generated by AI. It was based on an email, a text chain, obviously anonymized and changed, but both have actually, and AI has the ability to now create an email or text chain that would be completely unidentifiable in terms, you would not be able to tell that against the original whether it was true or not. Now, there are warning signs, and these are something an investigator should always consider in practice. Now, this, for example, emails and messages copied into Word documents, I think would be a poor source of documentary evidence. Is texts that appear unusually polished or overly structured or repeated. AI has the ability of frequently repeats in lines of 3, or formatting, often use of the dash mark or punctuation can seem inconsistent with the sender's usual style. So none of these points, I think, prove fabrication of AI generation on their own, but I think it indicates the investigators should look more closely, ask questions, seek what's the best available original evidence before drawing conclusions. And that's often the case, that we ask both parties for, say, a text message in this thing, because you should be able to resolve in that thing. I think it's something that I think 5 years ago we weren't talking about, we weren't aware, but now it feels very much at the forefront. So I think this is a good example of the integrity of the investigation, integrity of the evidence, and probably thinking as well. The job of the investigator is to actually to think about the thing in the round, and not take anything at face value. And where you have a concern is to record that in the report. I mean, your job's to gather the evidence. So I hope that was a little bit of fun anyway, but also slightly scary if you're my age. So next we go back to, interviewing witnesses. So good practice. Now I suppose this could be a session. This could be a session or two on its own. This is so here we're talking about, I think, why it's important is because investigations often fall at the meeting stage, and obviously the purpose of the investigation, this is why clarity at the start is important, is to establish facts, not fault. The investigator is trying to understand what's agreed, what's disputed, and what's denied. This means creating a process whereby witnesses can give their own account in their own words without being led to a particular answer. So at the start of the meeting, it's important to explain the process clearly. This includes the reasons for the investigation meeting, confidentiality expectations, the limits of confidentiality, and what would happen to their notes, and the fact that their notes might be ultimately disclosable or viewable should processes go beyond the process that you're in. Witnesses should also understand that they have the opportunity to review a note, suggest amendments, confirm where they agree and note it, and all in accordance with the terms of reference. So a simple questioning model is you start with an open question, you listen, and then probe, depending on what answers they give you, clarify, play back, and confirm, but always start with an open question. Might be useful as well, we've got a poll here to say which of the following do you think is an effective opening question. I'll leave a moment for people to put their answers here. Here we go. Let's I'll have a go too. Right, I think everybody's pretty much hit it on the head. Where have we got? So, how's everyone? Oh, we're going. Yes, I think that's pretty much everyone spotted it. It's not as obvious as it seems, because often you're given a remit, you're given a scope in terms of a meeting with an individual, and you're probably trying to get to the fact of, did Paul get angry? What was that, a heated meeting? I mean, you want to get there, absolutely. But I think it's very important, and I think the danger is leading your witness to an answer, because often, if there were a hearing or other stages, the witnesses might not stand by that because they're saying, no, you told me that was the thing, I was just agreeing with you. This is not that, you need to gather their evidence. It's about gathering good evidence. And that's why the open questions such as, please talk me through what happened from your perspective, is probably a good way to start. It allows them to explain the events without interruption, without pressure, without introducing language such as heated or bully or angry, or so it's important to do that. You can then use the probing questions to explore the sequence or the details or the context of the witness and their first-hand knowledge. Now, clarifying questions can be useful when something's unclear, and a closed question can be used later for specifics, often disputed points, or often when you're meeting with the subject of the complaint and they're talking about everything except the complaint. I can't believe you're still talking about the fact I murdered my wife, but you never talk about the fact that I gave her Christmas presents, or so you've got to actually get to the nub of the issue, as it were. One example and a good summary kind of way to do it is to, in summary, you have said that, and then play back what they've told you and say, is that correct? And you'd be surprised often how you may not have got the nuance of what they've said, or they may have gone further or not far enough in terms of that. So playback questions are really useful in that. I mean, there's no rigid order in terms of interviewing questions. It depends on the type of investigations and the evidence. Have the principles of fairness, and hopefully this is what runs through all good investigations, is you give advance warning, you don't ambush, you avoid loaded language, and you don't make assumptions. I think one of the really good tools for an investigator is the pause. Allow them time to, and often you'll find that people will fill the pause and go a little bit further. So silence is a really good tool. I think interviewing practices in terms of workplace investigations, it's a hard tool to master. It's difficult. Each meeting is different. It's one of these things, the more you do, the better you get. The worst examples probably we'll see of it is where somebody probably fancies themselves a barrister, as it were, and they probably make the worst investigators, in the sense of, you can almost see them asking, yes or no questions, sort of answering only yes or no. Are you going to stop beating your wife? Or something like that. And can only, they've got a preconceived idea. They feel like their job is to the investigator's job is far more neutral than that. It's far more nuanced. It's a gathering of evidence. So I think we could have a whole session on interview, and we do actually have sessions on interviewing questions, but really important. But I think the only probably thing I'll say is just the most important thing is start with open questions, then to probe, to clarify, play back, confirm, and I think that's it on probably interviewing practice in the time that we've got. Next, I'll go to assessing conflicting evidence.
So conflicting evidence is probably one of the most challenging aspects of our investigation, is dealing with conflicting accounts. And as investigators, it's something we encounter really frequently. Now, the key is not that the accounts differ, it's how we assess the evidence fairly, transparently, and without assumption. So when weighing up the conflicting versions of events, start looking at internal consistency. Does that person's account hold together logically? Are the details coherent every time they say the story? You can interview someone and think, oh, okay, I believe them. I've got a gist of this. I know what's going on. But then you can interview another 4 witnesses and they state something completely different happened. So it's really important to take each part separately. Then look externally. Is the corroboration documents, messages, timing, other witnesses that support or challenge what they say? We also need to consider plausibility. So look at the timing of events, whether the individual actually had the opportunity to observe what they're describing. These practical elements are often more informative than the confidence or presentation style of the person you're interviewing. And that's a crucial point. So avoid assumptions based on seniority, or the confidence, or how articulate somebody appears. A nervous or quiet witness may be far more reliable than someone who sounds very polished and has all of their ducks in a row. If you do end up preferring one account over another, be clear, why do you prefer it? Your reasoning must be grounded in evidence, not just instinct, not assumption, and not how convincing someone seems to be in the room. Importantly, if the evidence is genuinely balanced, and it's absolutely acceptable to say so, but overstating certainly introduces a risk, whereas transparency protects both the process and your organisation. Finally, consider where you may be dealing with reluctant witnesses. Someone who may not want to be there, someone who may not want to get involved, so they may be hesitant, they may be fearful, or they may be unsure. So always factor that into the context when you're looking at credibility of your assessments. It's only when an in-depth assessment of evidence can be reached do we start looking for report findings. James is now going to walk us through how we would write that investigation report.
Apologies. Writing an investigation report is arguably one of the more difficult tasks. Not something it takes a lot of time, a lot of thought. I think in terms of where the report sits, obviously it's where the investigator brings the evidence together in a clear, structured, objective way. So again, we talk about the role and the themes running through here, and it's important to preserve this, because the purpose of the investigation and the investigator is not to decide culpability or to impose outcomes. The investigator's role is to set out the factual findings based on the evidence gathered, so that the decision maker can understand what happened and what remains in dispute. So a good report should follow the terms of reference closely. I think this is important because to go beyond the terms of reference defined scope of the investigation, you often would fail to address the issues therein, but also you're outside of your scope of reference. So you'd be opening the door to criticism, but also you think about the principles of fairness. There should be nothing in the investigation the individual hasn't had a chance to provide a response to. We go back to natural justice, to fairness. So we don't want to make, obviously, investigation report open to challenge. You've done all this work. So I think a chronology is a really good place to start in a report, as the reader who won't live with it for 1, 2, 3, or 6 months, as you or the investigator would have, will be picking this up. And I think setting out events in date order helps the reader understand the sequence of what happened, how the evidence fits together, and whether the accounts are consistent with the surrounding evidence. But I think it's also important to include in there a chronology of the investigation. So when you're instructed, when you've met with parties, any delay, because often investigations are, and apologies to any trade union members here, they're often set out to criticize any investigation for delay. Now, it's often the delay in the investigation doesn't sit with the investigator, it's the availability of witnesses, it's people providing certain documents or other elements. So it's important to record in the report where there has been delay, the reasons for delay, and to be completely open, honest, and transparent about that. Now, I think in terms of where there's conflicting evidence, the report should explain how those conflicts have been assessed, any limits to the material available, and explain all of this within the rationale of the report. Now, the structure should be easy to follow. I think a good format would include, a commentary about the terms of reference at the start, background, methodology, the evidence summary, and then findings by issue. And then on the back of the report, you put appendices or key documents. So this gives the report a logical framework and helps ensure that nothing important is missed. So I think when setting out the findings under, say, the particular allegations or issues, each one should be done separately. And for each, you summarize the relevant evidence identify what is agreed, what is disputed or denied, and set out the factual findings in a clear and neutral language. So also mitigation is relevant, and this would usually come after the findings of fact rather than being mixed in with them themselves, because that keeps the report objective and avoids confusing what happened with how the conduct should be assessed later. And I think I used the example of harassment earlier, and often you'd find in a report which probably doesn't meet the standard would be that they'd talk about what the person who said something was offensive meant. Whilst that's relevant, the focus, say on there was sexual harassment or something like that nature, it would more be, well, okay, what was the impact on the individual? I think you absolutely include what's meant, but factually you determine, well, did the interaction happen as alleged? What does the individual say the impact is on it? And then essentially you've got finding fact, did it happen? What they said, and then you can say, then you talk to mitigation and say, well, you talk to, well, whether they regretted doing what they're saying, or whether there was a context or a background in what they were saying. So I think it's important how things are set out. I think the key message is the report should be transparent, concise, usable for the next stage, which is often a disciplinary or a review or so just obviously looking to where it's going. It should also show the route from the evidence finding without advocacy or speculation or unnecessary commentary. Here, it really is useful just to set out the facts. One of the things that we do in investigations by design is each of our reports sent for legal QA, so it's that second pair of eyes. I often send it to Solicitor College at Horridge Farrelly, who will look through to ensure that we've followed the terms of reference, we've answered the questions, and that it's a robust thing. Often these are the documents that go in the employment tribunal bundles. Those, where the stakes are that. I think get the report right. But if every other stage is right before that, the report should follow. And I think that's probably all we say on report writing, though. As I say, we could do a session on that. I think next we'll run through the top 10 pitfalls and how to avoid them. And this is the last slide.
So now let's look at some of the most common pitfalls we see in workplace investigations. More importantly, how we're going to avoid them. So these are issues that can undermine fairness, prolong the process, or create avoidable legal or organisational risk. Now, the first pitfall is delay. Prompt action is absolutely essential. Now, this isn't only from a legal procedural perspective, it also maintains trust and prevents the issue from escalating. Even if progress is slow, keep all the parties updated. The update goes a long way to maintain confidence in the process and to let them understand where you are. Secondly, unclear allegations. If the issues aren't clearly defined at the outset, the investigation will drift. Now, setting out those allegations precisely gives you very clear direction and will save you significant time and difficulty when you're drafting your report. For example, a line like inappropriate comments were made doesn't tell you what was said to who, where, and when, or how you can make a finding on that fact. So it feels like an impossibility and therefore leaves the door open to scrutiny. So precision at the start makes everything downstream easier and easier to write the report. The third pitfall is poor planning. So a structured scope, a realistic timescale, evidence gathering in timely manner. All of this plans to help with overwhelm and helps you stay proportionate and avoids duplication or any missteps. Fourthly, lack of impartiality. Investigators really must try to remain neutral throughout, and this can be the most difficult part, especially if you know the person, especially if you've worked with the person, especially if you're involved with them on a daily basis. You will automatically have a view. But the role of the investigator is not to prove or disprove your case. It's establish facts objectively. So only if and when you hand over to the next stage of the process, the next person in the process can make a fair, balanced decision. Any perceptions of bias can weaken confidence in the whole entire process. So ensure that you keep all of your decisions and all of your opinions evidence-based. The fifth is poor documentation. Disorganized files create risk. That can undermine your credibility. It can make any subsequent stages like disciplinary hearings or external scrutiny much harder. So good, consistent record keeping is essential to show you're following a fair and thorough process.
Apologies. Point 6. So inadequate in evidence gathering. Obviously, the job of the investigator is to preserve the integrity of the investigation. So yeah, question emails cut and pasted into Word documents, etc. Your job's to preserve the integrity. Leading question, limited evidential value, likely to meet with objection. Also suggests a predetermined view, not neutral evidence gathering. Failure to follow process. Stick to the policy. Follow the scope outlined in the terms of reference. You do the best report in the world. If you're not following policy and you're outside the terms of reference, it's not going to get you anywhere. Inconsistent handling. So consistency is obviously key to fairness. Consistency in choice of witnesses, the way that you conduct the interviews with witnesses, gathering evidence, drafting findings, how you treat consistency is key. The final bit, and I think really the important bit, and we haven't touched on today, is whether they're a complainant or a subject to the complaint. I think there's a human being at the centre of this, and I think poorly framed allegations, concerns, inconsistent application of policy, lack of adherence to best practice, mishandling, all of these things can impact on the individual. And I think the real take home, and the NHS do this quite well actually in some cases. There was something called the Dido Harding report, which talked about protection of staff and well-being, and this was followed, I think, an anaesthetist who committed suicide after they were under investigation in their practice. And I think it was the support provided to the individuals during an investigation, which is often the most stressful time of their life. And it's regular updates. It's making sure that the pastoral care is there and the support. And I think probably it's a good point to end on, because at the end of this, all of the workplace investigations, yes, it's important to get it right, but there are human beings at the centre of this, whether they've raised a whistleblowing complaint and they have concerns about that, or indeed whether they are subject to the complaint. It's a stressful process, and it needs to be sensitively done. And that's probably a good point, I think, to end on. I think in terms of learning objectives there, I like to think we've touched on all of these points. I think we could have a day session, and we at IBD we do often provide training to employers, questioning, interviewing skills, drafting, etc. So on any of these points we do kind of provide it, but I hope that's been useful as a kind of high level summary for all of I think the key elements in workplace investigations, distilled our kind of collective knowledge in 45 minutes. I've gone over. Apologies, Sian. We've gone 4 minutes over, I think, our allocated time. But I think next is probably any questions. I'll turn over to you, Sian.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sian. I'm the BD manager for HF and Intern Investigations by Design. We've had a few questions through, which is great. So I will start with yours, Safia. Are there any recommended investigation techniques or frameworks?
Oh, okay, good question. I think there are. I think that obviously the framework for workplace investigations, obviously the starting point would be the ACAS code. So obviously look at that. I think you're in an organizational setting. It's obviously, if you've got policies and procedures, that's where to start in terms of that. We talked about consistency earlier. Obviously, if the organization has a way in which they're conducting things, obviously it's important to stay consistent. I think techniques probably in terms of that. I think we've talked about interview questions. I think there are good techniques we've touched on. I think that's I think there is training. I think often investigators are not born, they're created. I think it's through experience, through development. Everyone can do that. I hope that's answered your question, Safia. If not, please feel free to email me following the meeting today.
Great, thanks, James. Great question, Safia, thank you. We do have a few from Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. First one, how do you deal with whistleblowing cases where the reporter does not feel comfortable providing specific details of their identity or their identity? Is the only option to close the case as having insufficient information?
Right. Well, thanks for the easy question, Rachel. So I think on that, probably what I'd say is that this is quite a complex area where there's a balance. We talked about natural justice. Obviously, you've got you're balancing investigations with the right of the individual to know what's said, the allegations are, and to some degree who's accused them of and face them that. Now the Employment Tribunal has has addressed this in terms of there is an assessment to be made at the start of these investigations in terms of whether you're considering anonymity of witnesses. Now often with anonymity, because of the competing interests of the individual, say in this case the whistleblower, and the individual who's probably subject to the complaints, there's a detailed kind of assessment, I think, set out quite well in a case called Linfield Cash and Carry. I think the Employment Appeals Tribunal did something there, and they've got a sort of a summary of things to consider, and essentially whether there is a way of, is it practically, can you ensure confidentiality? Are there ways of then thereby mitigating in terms of the reasons why the individual wants confidentiality, in terms of how you can preserve fairness of the process? Often it's not possible to preserve confidentiality because it's quite clear whether only 3 people in a room or who the whistleblower would be about that, or in that sense. So I think there's a detailed assessment as to whether confidentiality should be or could be implemented. I think in terms of the second part to the question, which was is the only option to do with insufficient evidence, I'd say they're probably 2 completely different questions, because the question about the insufficiency of the evidence would be one to judge probably independent. I think you do the confidentiality point first. Anonymity, can you grant anonymity? And then we also address that. And often an employer is faced with a position whereby they'll have a set of concerns raised, and the assessment is on the employer. It doesn't matter what label it's been raised under, and in some words, the words they use are irrelevant. I think as a metaphor, you can't always unring a bell, and I think if somebody's rung a bell, and even if they don't want to proceed with the complaint, as an employer, you may take a view this is sufficiently serious that we need to investigate it. So I think in terms of the sufficiency and whether you need to investigate that, I'd deal with that almost separately. But I think I hope that's all right. Again, if you want to touch base on any of those points, please email me following the meeting today. I hope I've answered that.
Great, thank you, James. Next one from Rachel. Are there any recommended training providers for investigation training / case management?
Oh, well, I'd say investigations by design, obviously, but all good providers are available. Often, I know the employment law team at Horace Farrelly also do training on investigations and more widely sort of the case law and what bits are important. So that there are providers. We're not the BBC, I can say. We're a good one, I think, in this forum. Though Alex might tell me off at the end. So next question, please.
No problem. Another one from Rachel, thank you. Do you recommend using Copilot to transcribe the meeting, or are there any confidentiality issues with this?
Yes, that's one for at the moment. AI absolutely is we're seeing massive changes in everything we do at AI. Now, I think the problem I have probably with Copilot and other things is they will produce a transcription that is sometimes a word soup. It's not, I mean, you can have an hour or so meeting with someone, it will produce a 40-page transcription that will, you envisage would save time, but inevitably, I mean, it contains every r utterance and which I think it's often useful to, because the investigation meeting notes are so important, to produce it's not a verbatim account, but a close account of the meeting. And I think it's worth taking time. There are transcription tools that do that grant anonymity. Obviously, your organizational policy would determine whether that data is maintained confidentially and whether it fits within your own data processing skills. Because obviously, if you're a data controller here, you need to ensure that. Also ensuring that the data can be deleted adequately, that I think probably my view is I'm not sure that the quality is quite there yet. There are transcription tools that do quite a good job, but I still think we're not all redundant yet, and I think we're probably the confidentiality question would be, it depends on your organization. I think I'd have to very much ensure with whoever's your information governance that to use that tool in that fashion would comply with your data policy, probably. I hope that's helped.
Thanks, James. Okay, perfect. Next one from Rachel Still. What is your view on HR involvement in whistleblowing cases?
Yes. I mean, HR involvement per se, or in investigation, I suppose in investigating whistleblowing cases, I think, Rachel, it's a good question. And I think that question of who should investigate is really, really important. And I think can you have somebody who will, I think, sufficiently skilled and trained, as often our HR colleagues are, very skilled in that. Are they best placed to do it? I think where the matters don't, I mean, obviously, if it's a whistleblower about HR, taking 10% off everybody's salary every month, then, probably not best to get somebody in HR to do it. But I think they can be well placed to do it. I think it depends on the circumstances. I think whistleblowing cases especially need to have somebody who has the relevant skills and experience, because the consequence of getting whistleblowing cases wrong, I mean, all cases, but particularly whistleblowing, can be organizationally, in terms of risk and other things, quite big. So I think the important probably point would be to get the right person doing it, who has been given enough time to do it, because these things are not easy. They're very time consuming, enough support, and who's not conflicted, who can be independent, neutral, and of sufficient seniority, especially if it's about chief exec, which we often see, or external. Yeah, so consider external if there's nobody in your organization who's sufficiently placed to do it. But I hope that's answered your question. Lots of good questions, Rachel.
I'll just add on to that one, if I may. So from the question, Rachel, what I heard was, if you have an investigation, then most of the time you're assigned a HR person to work alongside that. Now, the HR person's there just to ensure that policies are followed, that the person is aware of which policy is paramount and what you need to do there, and also to have a look at if there's any legal challenge. But they're not there to make decisions. So if they are with the investigation manager, it's up to the investigation manager to do all of the investigation themselves, not to be swayed by anybody else's opinion, because ultimately they have to stand by that report. So although HR can be with them and sometimes do go along to take notes and so on, that's just their role. It is just to support and to make sure that the investigator is on the right side of the policy. So I hope that gives you a bit more clarity.
Yeah, thanks, Pippa. I had in my mind somebody from Investigator sort of being seconded to undertake the investigation, but you're absolutely right about the support quote. Yeah, thank you, Pippa.
Great, perfect. Thanks both. We just have time for one more question, so I'll pick this one from Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. With difficult and complex investigations, how do you protect and take care of yourself when some of the subject matter may be very upsetting? Before I pass over to you both, please do send any questions across to the speakers. Their contact details are available in the PDF of the slides, which are available after the webinar, or do ask ERMIC to send forward if you have any questions. I appreciate we've not had time for all of them. Sorry guys, over to you.
Good question, Lynn. They are often difficult, and you often have people with discussing suicidal iterations, or people who are a very low ebb in their life, or have had a very difficult time in their life. So yeah, it's difficult to, I suppose, spend time in that environment and not take it home, because we're all humans at the end of the day. I've never seen a pantomime villain. I've never seen, on the other side, anybody who's just, gone out to make, I think we're all kind of well-meaning at the start of the day. I think it's support. I think it's having a team and having people you can talk to, and to be able to highlight any of these issues as you're doing it, and to know that you're not alone in this. And it's a difficult job, but it's rewarding at the end, because you can get clarity. You can hopefully give finality and clarity to what is a difficult situation. That's probably. I wonder, Pippa, have you got?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's the thing that we try to get. Obviously, we have some difficult cases, and it's about taking some time away. So if you are starting to feel a bit of overwhelm, or if you've had a particularly difficult investigation meeting, then don't wait for lunchtime. Go and take 5 minutes out. Go and walk away from the screen. Get a cup of coffee. Make a phone call to a family, or just ground yourself, and then go back to what you were doing. You are human at the end of the day, and dealing with humans who can get upset is also really upsetting for you. So it's okay to feel that. It's okay to you wouldn't be human if you didn't feel that as well. But just remember just to take some time out and ground yourself before you go back.
Great, thank you very much both, and thank you for the great questions there. That is everything from us, so I will hand back over to Alex.
Yep, absolutely. Arrived back on stage just in time for the wrap up. Guys, thanks so much for that. I think that Q&A at the end especially was fantastic. The quality and number of questions is always a testament to how strong the content was. So thanks for running over a little bit for that. And it's my pleasure to thank HF and James and Pippa and Sean for that presentation. I think that was excellent, looking at all the pitfalls, appropriate ways of handling workplace investigations, practical strategies, which is what we always like to hear, going from the theoretical and the abstract to the practical. So really, really excellent. And I hope that we will have all of you back at the ERMIC Academy again soon. In the meantime, if anybody is still on the call, I believe you are, if you could answer the survey that my colleague Amelia is about to put up. As I said, really valuable feedback for both our presenters and for us here at ERMIC. So please take a moment to do that. And if you have any questions for either James or Pippa, I'm sure you can get in touch with them. You can find HF on the contact details in the ERMIC partner directory on the website, or you can drop any of us here at ERMIC a note, and we would be happy to connect you. James, Pippa, and Sean, thank you again very much for being here. Thank you to HF, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.